Hello, Lapeer, members of our community and staff joining us today on our Zoom call. I'm excited to finally present the finalized version of our district's COVID preparedness return to school plan, which was formally approved by our Board of Education at yesterday evening's meeting. Our plan is to make that plan public today in its entirety. Much of it will answer several questions that have been sent to us over the course of the last few weeks from staff in the community as it relates to what our plan is, our specific approaches to safety and cleaning and hygiene and all the protocols and requirements for school districts to have face-to-face instruction in addition to our instructional plan for both face-to-face and a virtual setting. Our purpose today is very simply to respond to community and staff questions. We have done a number of surveys. We have sent highlights of our plan out to our staff and community to get the feedback from you. And our goal today with members of our district leadership team present on this Zoom call is to kind of rapid fire answer these questions for you. So we're going to try and get through as many of them as possible. There are many. Our goal is to have this wrapped up in less than an hour, but also keep in mind that all of the responses to these questions will be published in writing for your review as well. Before we get into the questions, there's a few things that I wanted to have you pay special attention to in relation to the construction of this plan and the many complexities connected to actually drafting something that is appropriate for all of our students and staff. First and foremost, we are not public health officials. This has been really an unprecedented time in our nation's history. We're public educators. That's what we do. That's our expertise. But we really have done our best and put forward a good faith effort to attempt, in large part, to return our students to what we can consider a more traditional face-to-face model, because we actually believe here in Lapeer that education is an essential industry. And what does that mean? As an essential industry, it means it's something that we must have. We believe our students need to be in school with their teachers, with our staff, with their friends, in an environment that fosters the growth and development in them as human beings that they must have to be successful adults. And if we've committed to being an essential industry, meaning that staff and students are going to be interacting, we're also required to ensure their health and safety in that environment. That's foremost in our thinking. We have literally worked on this plan every single day in some capacity since March, knowing that the pandemic and the requirements it placed on us as educators really changed in large part how we do business. And so we have been challenged with figuring out ways to address this new reality. And this plan and its approval last night at our board meeting is kind of the culminating effort of all that work. If we're required to return to a virtual setting by an outside entity like the governor's office or the Department of Education, we're fully prepared to do that. But it's our firm belief that students need to be in school. Community surveys conducted over the past several months, an overwhelming majority of our community desires the district to at least attempt a return to face-to-face. And, when I say attempt, there's a lot of variables that are really outside of our control. We currently find ourselves in phase 4 of the governor's phased-in approach to determining, what some of the restrictions are placed on our community and our school district and our businesses. The Safe Start plan that was published by the governor's office at the end of June does allow for face-to-face instruction, but if we plan to do this, we're required to do certain things. And we really do need your help as a community, both staff members, parents, businesses. We can't make every single possible accommodation, but we're going to do ones that are reasonable and achievable. And that's what you'll hear today. It's important to note that several very important organizations, including the American Pediatric Association, the Center for Disease Control, and even our local county health department, all recommend a return to face-to-face instruction for a variety of reasons, which I won't get into right now. But we believe that, and that's what we're attempting to do. We have met weekly with health department officials, county district leadership, the ISD, to ensure a county-wide consistency in our approach to a return to face-to-face instruction. So there aren't vast differences between what students are experiencing from district to district. This is a living and breathing process, and as of August 6, 2020, this is where Lapeer Community Schools finds itself. That certainly is subject to change based on variables outside of our control or things that we deem that may need to be adjusted. And as I said, all these answers will be published in writing. So with that, I'm going to get right into it and begin answering questions. I will then transfer to different members of the district leadership team to answer questions in their areas. And we hope that this begins to ease your concerns and begin to give you a greater level of comfort with what we desire to do, which is get back to interacting with our students to do what we are expert in, which is teaching and learning. So I would say one of the questions that I get most frequently, and this certainly was reflected in a lot of the survey responses and some of the direct questions from our community, is, did the district consider a hybrid option? And the answer to that question is yes. And when, just to define that term, hybrid meaning students would be in school, in classrooms for a certain number of days a week, and would be in a virtual setting for the remaining days of the week. We've really, for the last 7 years, by offering a virtual program, have operated in a hybrid setting already here in Lapeer schools. So it's nothing new to us, where students and families have a variety of choices of how they want to consume their educational experience. They can be in a traditional 6-period-a-day setting at the secondary level or an elementary building, for the entirety of the day. They can take a class or two online. They can take their entire experience online. We have students that are 100% virtual, but also participate in school activities and athletics. So we've had this for going on 7 years now, that hybrid approach. However, hybrid in terms of the current reality as it's best understood really was not feasible for our district, given a number of considerations, daycare concerns of families that was expressed to us, transportation, and many logistics issues relative to getting students to and from school, and a variety of other options, and including the fact that our existing virtual program does allow for considerable flexibility. So we have opted for a full return to face-to-face instruction, or should we be required to do so, a return for all students to virtual. But even if parents do not desire to return face-to-face, we have a variety of virtual options available, which will be discussed later. Will students be required to have temperature checks upon entry of school buildings, or will that be left up to the parents' discretion? According to Phase 4, this is not a requirement that schools have to do. It is a recommended practice, and we will be encouraging our parents to participate in the temperature checking and monitoring of any potential symptoms of their children prior to sending them to school. The district is currently working on a tool that will help guide parents in that practice. And this really goes back to my original comments about needing everyone to participate in this endeavor. Overwhelming majority of our community wants to go back face-to-face. Please understand, in order for us to logistically accomplish that, we cannot possibly do everything at the school level, and are going to require the support of our parents to help us. And this is a big one. So talking to your kids every day about how they feel, monitoring those symptoms, having a practical guide in order to do that is something that we'll provide, but we ask that you help us in that regard. Can students who elect to go 100% virtual while in Phase 4 through the Lapeer virtual program still participate in clubs, extracurricular activities, including athletics? And the answer is absolutely yes. We have students who meet the MHSA requirements for participation and would not limit that if they continue to meet those. Are we opening with just the bare minimum? Meaning, are we only doing the things that are required in Phase 4? And are we doing any of the highly recommended guidelines? The answer is we must comply with all the roadmap requirements of Phase 4. Additionally, we're making a really good faith effort to do a number of the highly recommended protocols for safety. An example of that is our employee screening process. In the event that students show aggression to anyone, especially our staff, in regards to deliberately coughing, sneezing, spitting, or refusing to wear their mask, what will be the consequences? And school discipline will be handed down in accordance with our current student handbook on a case-by-case basis. And just quite frankly, folks, this type of behavior will not be tolerated. We have a requirement as a public institution to comply with the current law as it relates to guaranteeing the safety of all of our staff and all of our students. And we will not tolerate students refusing to wear their mask or acting in an aggressive way with one of the examples that I just mentioned. And so we will provide masks if you don't have them. If there's a medical reason why you cannot comply with the masking requirement, that requires a medical documentation, as is the case with any medical condition that school currently operates under, and that will be no different in this time. Under Phase 4 guidelines, would open houses and parents coming to class on the first day of school still be allowed? The answer is yes, as long as our visitors adhere to all safety, distancing, and masking guidelines. Will class sizes be smaller because of more students choosing online options in the fall? That is a very distinct possibility. We have a number of families who have indicated that if it's our intention to continue with face-to-face instruction, that they will be opting for a virtual setting. And we are currently evaluating the number of families that are selecting virtual, because we have to provide the appropriate staffing for those accommodations, but also that will have the effective result of reducing our class sizes in the face-to-face setting. In the event the school year starts in Phase 3, which is still a possibility, our first day is until August 31st, it's August 6th, we're in Phase 4, it is a possibility that we could regress to Phase 3. Will the entire school year be virtual, or will in-person learning take place once we're in Phase 4? This really is a great question, because we anticipate the high likelihood that we will go in between phases at some point in the next several months. And the answer is we want to return to in-person instruction as soon as it's allowable under the roadmap guidelines. So we would stay virtual as long as we're in Phase 3. We're fully prepared to do that. If we're returned to Phase 4, changes where we're at in our region of the state, it's our desire to get kids back in school in a normal setting. Will the district notify parents if a student or students test positive for COVID-19? The answer is yes. The district will, in cooperation with the county health department, alert parents to a finding of positive COVID-19 within the staff or student body during the school year. And that's per roadmap guidance on page 25 of that document. We've been doing this all summer with summer school, athletics, and other student and staff interactions, and working with the health department to iron out those processes and procedures, and feel like we've got a really good plan to make people aware of our positive test cases. Is it safe for children to wear masks outside when it is hot? So when you're thinking about like a recess, for example, experience, that wearing masks outdoors when it's hot and humid certainly can be uncomfortable, which we understand, but it's vital for students and staff to wear them in this environment if social distancing cannot be achieved. And that's really guidance given us per our county health department. So by way of example, if you're a third grade student and we are doing our best to what's called cohort our students, which means keep that third grade class together throughout much of the day as possible. The county health department and CDC guidance indicates that cohorting students, or just people in general, does reduce the risk of infection or transfer of COVID-19. So if I am a third grade student and I'm sitting with the same students in my class all day, those same students go together at lunch, though we can do a good job of keeping them together. But at recess time, it's really hard to maintain unless it's just one class outdoors at recess at once. It's really hard to keep the social distancing requirements for elementary age students in recess. So as a result, if they mask, that certainly helps us keep them unmasked while in the classroom. So again, these are certainly kind of cumbersome requirements, but it's what we have to do if we desire to be back face to face. What are the district's contingency plans in the event that students refuse to wear masks? I think I covered that one already, but just want to reiterate that students will be considered insubordinate if they don't have medical documentation and will be dealt with from a disciplinary perspective by district administration and building administration. All right, so with that, the next phase of this presentation is going to be handed over to Mr. Mark Rader. He is our Director of Business and Operations. And Mark will talk very specifically about some of the cleaning procedures, safety protocols the district is implementing in an effort to comply with the roadmaps requirements, but also, we've spent a lot of time with district operations staff, literally physically walking our buildings to see what's feasible, what's practical in the application of these requirements. And Mark has a really good handle on how that will be executed. So Mark, take it away.
First question, even though it's not required under phase 4, will the district attempt to maintain social distancing in our buildings? The simple answer is yes. The district staff will remind students on a daily basis to social distance as much as possible. We will also have signage throughout our buildings at various places, not only in common areas, but also on the entry points, encouraging that. And I've personally, as Matt mentioned, walked the buildings looking for furniture in the classrooms so we can maximize social distancing, removing extra furniture, and having desks as spread out as possible. Will desks be arranged in a certain way? The answer is yes. When all feasibly possible, all our classrooms have different configurations, but for the most part, we will have desks or tables, the furniture students use for instruction, facing in the same direction in the classrooms. Cleaning protocols, we spent enormous amount of time on this. Is there a specific plan for cleaning classrooms in the 5 minutes between classes at the secondary level? The answer, yes. Cleaning will occur after each class change, and staff will clean the desktops individually of each desk in a classroom, their appropriate classroom, at the end of the class before the next session starts for the secondary. For the elementary classrooms, we will be cleaning the desk and furniture thoroughly and disinfecting on a nightly basis, because those students will be staying in their classroom for the entire day, not changing like secondary.
And one important point to also note, Mark, is that, for our community's sake, we're required to provide all of this equipment. So you've heard it referred to as PPE, or personal protective equipment. So that refers to cleaning supplies, face masks, gloves, shields for any staff who's required to clean a piece of equipment throughout the course of the day.
Custodians, though, on a daily basis through the buildings will be responsible for cleaning the frequently touched areas in the hallways, in the libraries, in the cafeterias, also cleaning the bathrooms at least one time during the instructional day, which is required under the plan once every 4 hours. And we will clean all bathrooms at least once throughout the day, as well as the thorough cleaning at the end of the day and the nightly routines. Will staff be provided face shields? And the answer is yes. In our cleaning kits, for those who are required to clean, they will provide, as Matt stated, face shield, face mask, gloves, and the disinfectant for those purposes. Food service. I'm going to shift a little bit and go to food service and talk about our food service. Will food service look the same under the return? It will be slightly different, meaning we will be maximizing again on the social distancing. We will utilize as much space as possible at the secondary and the cafeterias, having students try to achieve social distance, maximum of 6 foot. When all possible, we are putting extra tables. We're putting a designation on seats and tabletops to encourage the social distancing of the students. The cashiers and the food lines will look slightly different in the fact that we will have protective shields for the staff and the students. And the food itself will look primarily the same, except it'll be what we're going to call grab and go, much more compartmentalized to make it easier for students to get in and out of the lines without having to spend a lot of time being in a tight space with multiple students. At the elementary level, lunch will look slightly different in the fact that each classroom will stay with their cohort class and go to the lunchroom together and sit at one table as a classroom, trying to maintain the social distancing from other classrooms. When lunch is complete, return to the classroom or outside for recess, weather permitting. And with that, I will turn it back to Mr. Wandry to move on to the next area of responsibility.
Thank you, Mr. Rader. I think one of the areas that we get a lot of questions about is transportation and what it will look like to get students to and from school. Joining us today is Mrs. Linda Thompson, our Transportation Director, to address some of those questions. Linda?
Hi, Matt. Thank you. First, I'd like to say I know that a lot of concerns that parents have is how we plan on keeping the bus clean. Drivers will be disinfecting the bus on all of the heavily touched areas as much as possible, and we will be disinfecting the bus before and after every route. Some of the questions I received is, how will the bus driver enforce face mask on the bus? There'll be signage will be all over the bus doors stating face mask required before entry. Bus riders will be required to have a mask on before entering a school bus. And this is where we like to ask parents for their assistance as well, to encourage their student to keep the mask on for all of the riders on the bus. Was there any discussion of getting bus drivers help to manage these guidelines while on the route? Like every other district, we are always hiring. I just want to throw that out there. Drivers will monitor students' behavior and actions during routes for students' rule compliance. Repeated violations will result in students being referred to building principals for disciplinary actions and could include suspensions and/or bus privileges being revoked. We will take all of this very seriously, like you have said in the past, and we will follow what the school is doing as well. What if a child forgets their mask? We will have masks on the bus for students that do forget that, and the hand sanitizer is provided as well when they enter the bus. What if a child reports symptoms to the bus driver while on the bus? The student will be isolated as much as possible on the bus, and the information will be communicated to the bus garage, and the bus garage will communicate to the school building's principal for further follow-up and actions. What strategies will be in place to help ensure bus drivers are safe? All students will be required to have a face mask when entering the bus and required to use hand sanitizer. As always, students who do not follow the code of conduct rules will be referred to discipline for the building principals. Windows will be open, the roof hatches will be open, weather permitting, and that should assist as well. Are there any special seating arrangements that students and parents need to be aware of? Students are always encouraged to social distance on the bus as much as possible. We know it's a limited area, but if you get on the bus and there's an open seat, please get in that seat. Keep your hands to yourself, follow the safety rules, and always remain seated. And there again, we'd like to ask parents assistance and just encourage your child to keep their hands to themselves, leave everything in the backpack. And when you pick a seat, just stay in that. That'll help the driver, as well as safety for all the kids involved. And that's what I got, Matt.
Great. Thanks, Linda. Appreciate that.
Welcome.
So we've covered some of the basic cleaning protocols, both for the buildings and for transportation. Now we want to get into some of the curriculum and instruction questions that parents and staff have asked of us. And in joining us today to help us answer those questions are two of our executive directors, Mrs. Michelle Bradford for curriculum and instruction, and our executive director for special education and student services, Mrs. Jennifer Tyndall. So Michelle and Jenna, can you guys take over, please?
Sure. As it pertains to curriculum instruction, it's been a busy summer for teachers and administrators, and I will do my best to help answer these questions. So, will teachers need to set up their classrooms in a specific way under Phase 4 guidelines? We will take steps that are reasonable and possible to maximize the spacing of desks or tables in the classroom, to include desks facing the same direction toward the front of the classroom as Mark indicated. Teachers should plan to move their bookshelves, for example, consider teaching workshop at the desks versus the carpeted areas, and use the space for the seating arrangements. How would hall passing time be handled at secondary level under Phase 4 guidelines? Well, masks will need to be worn. We have 4 secondary buildings, and we will be taking steps to limit students as much as possible. For example, to include limiting the number of times students go to their lockers for books. And principals will be communicating these expectations to student parents in the next coming weeks. Do the phase guidelines allow for band, and what about choir? Yes, our secondary buildings each have a plan in place for band. We are looking to run band outdoors as much as possible, space kids apart and social distance outside or inside, and choir students will be required to wear a mask. Our masks required in gym class, indoors or outdoors during recess. Matt addressed this as well, but recess and gym should be conducted outside whenever possible with appropriate social distancing. If more than one class is outside and cannot social distance, students should wear masks, such as recess. In gym with one class, we've talked a lot about this, we will work to spread students out, and students may not have to wear a mask depending on the activity. Can students share supplies under phase 4 guidelines? We know we need to limit the sharing of personal items and supplies, such as writing utensils. We need to keep students' personal items separate and individually labeled. We also know we need to limit the use of classroom materials to small groups and definitely disinfect between use. Would you consider asking teachers to pre-record lessons in order to accommodate parents who can't be with students during the day? And then what about copy papers of coursework for students that don't have adequate internet access? Yes, if in phase 1 through 3, there are some pre-recorded lessons naturally being virtual, either directly by the teacher. The teacher might post some, for example, Khan Academy videos. Lesson videos are things that will be sent to the students each week in Google Classroom. Teachers have had training on this all summer and have been very busy learning ways to do this. All assignments will need to be accessed by Google Classroom, but some hard copy materials will be provided depending on the class. And hotspots, just like in the spring, will be available throughout the community to access internet. Has the district looked into purchasing a canned curricula designed specifically for remote teaching and learning in the event we transition to 100% virtual? We have this option for families with our current virtual program now that families can enroll in. If we move to phase 3, our goal is to have students be in contact with their teacher multiple times each week with our current curriculum, and that's the training that our teachers have gone through to put this online virtually. With the structure of Zoom times in phase 3, how would every student need to have their own dedicated computer? Yes, students will need their own device for Zoom times. We have a process for checking out the devices, just like we did in the spring. And it's important to note that our survey data, the surveys that we've sent out, indicate that the majority of our parents can provide a device. The data came out, about 30% of parents indicated they need a device, which we will have available. If we move to virtual learning, can the lower L Zoom schedule be modified so that students aren't Zooming for 3 full hours a day? One thing that we learned in the spring is that there was not enough time for quality instruction with that half-hour Zoom time. We know we have to increase the rigor for instruction. Our goal is to have contact with our current teacher in the classroom. It's very important to have that classroom interaction multiple times each week for quality teaching and learning. So we need to keep that Zoom time up there. What would become of EdTech classes in phase 3? The programs at EdTech will be ready to switch to virtual learning with a quick turnaround. Students will be expected to attend the virtual classes. Attendance will be taken, and instructors will teach and assign work with the online classroom. Assignments would come in the form of projects, presentations, videos, portfolios, naturally because it's hands-on work. And each teacher will host about 2-hour-long class periods. How will teachers be expected to collect work in phase 3? Could they collect work digitally? Absolutely. Teachers have been registering for various Google Classroom PD, like I mentioned, this summer. They've been very busy. They're learning ways to create assignments, assignments to include paper and pencil assessments or assignments, collect and interact with students digitally. Students can take pictures of their work and submit it. We're looking into Google Classroom extensions to allow for students to take the work in Google Classroom and work on it digitally. Lots of work has been done in this area. How will attendance be taken if the region is in phase 3? As a full-time virtual student, we're not required to take the so-called attendance as we're traditionally used to. However, as a district, we feel it's very important data to collect for parent communication purposes, as well as how we monitor student engagement. We will use Zoom to indicate attendance and Google Classroom assignments to monitor students submitting the work. Teachers are also in a virtual setting required to have two-way communication with students weekly, and certain weeks, will be collected for audit purposes, just as traditional. Under phase 3, will teachers be required to give district assessments? Yes, that's a virtual requirement, and we are working on ways to make traditional district assessments virtual currently. Last question for me, is the district investing in equipment to support remote teaching and learning in the event we regress to phase 3? We have learned a lot in a short amount of time this spring and summer regarding our needs. Additional technologies and software to online tools are being purchased, and we continue to look for instructional tools needed based on our training that we've had this summer. So Jen?
Good morning. So my questions are centered around special education, some follow-up with the virtual, as well as childcare at Kids and Company. So the first question, can a student who starts the year with in-person face-to-face instruction elect to change to full-time virtual? And students will be able to make that transition from traditional to face-to-face into virtual at the semester, which is in the middle of January. We believe as a district, the continuity of our virtual curriculum and our traditional curriculums, and find it's best that you take the transition at a semester break. There are no limits to any of the participants for virtual learning. The deadline for enrolling, the district is asking our families make the decision for full-time virtual no later than the first day of school, which is August 31st. This will help us with course selection, scheduling, and ensuring that you have the materials you need to be successful as a full-time virtual student. Again, reiterating that if you are a Lapeer virtual student and you want to change to face-to-face, again, you would have to change at the semester. Is the only curriculum Pearson curriculum? And that is not the case. If you go to lapeervirtual.org, we have multiple vendors for various grade levels, and we are encouraging families to look at those websites and check out the classes that are available. We do encourage that in grades 9 through 12, our students utilize the Pearson program. With a virtual program in phase 4, will students still be required to meet in person if they do not want to? And the answer to that right now is we encourage families to make the most of their virtual experience, having face-to-face meetings with their mentor teachers. However, we understand this is a very difficult and challenging time for everyone. And if you're not comfortable with having some face-to-face time with your mentor teacher, there are other ways that you would be able to interact and communicate with your mentor teacher. As I shift to preschool, the question is, what is the plan for preschool and childcare? As we are in phase 4, we are planning to offer preschool and childcare face-to-face. We are currently offering our summer camp and childcare programs today. If you are interested, we encourage you to call the Kids and Company number and discuss your options. In the event we go to phase 3 and we are in a situation where all students are working remotely, in the Return to Learn plan, in the phase 1 through 3 section, there is the option for districts to offer, and we do plan to offer childcare in the event we go to phase 3. And lastly, let's talk about special education and students with 504 plans. We will continue as a district to make every effort to provide special education programs and services that are outlined in your child's IEP and or 504 plan. In the coming weeks, you will be hearing from your case managers, and they will be scheduling IEP meetings with you to relook at your current IEP, as well as to discuss what happens if we go to phase 3. And we will be developing additional plans like we did in the spring that were called contingency plans to outline the programs and services that you will receive in the event we go to phase 3. If you have additional questions about your child's IEP or 504 plan, I encourage you to call my office and we can discuss your individual situation today. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle and Jen, for that. The final piece of our question and answer session is going to be Mrs. Kim Sieferle, our Executive Director for Human Resources. This specifically relates to many of our staff questions, but we invite members of the community who are joining us today to stay if they'd like to hear what our response to these questions and concerns sounds like, so you have an idea of what life will look like for our staff in this new configuration. So, Kim?
Thank you. My first question is, will staff be required to wear masks at all times? And generally the answer to that question is yes, although there are a few exceptions. Anytime staff members are indoors or on school transportation, they are required to wear masks, with the exception of eating, some of those kind of very specific instances. In an outdoor setting, masks are required when we are unable to social distance. We expect that to be true at the elementary level during recess. The number of kids, there will be frequent, and so staff will be required. In other outdoor settings, if we're able to social distance, masks will not be required. A very detailed communication went to staff on July 17th, and it's also available on the district website, return to work requirements for staff, and all of the exceptions and details regarding mask wearing is detailed in that communication. Next question, if a staff member needs to be quarantined, how will this affect their sick leave? And the true answer to this is that it depends on a number of factors. We will consider for all of our staff members, first and foremost, if they are able, if they're quarantined because of exposure, and so physically they're feeling fine, and so they're able to do work, our first step is to consider whether or not that staff member can be redeployed. Are they able to continue either their own work remotely, or are they able, do we have remote work that we can assign to them in order for them to continue working? In instances where staff members are continuing to work, they're working and they're being paid for that work, and so there is no need to use sick time or any other resource. If staff members are not able to be redeployed or able to work remotely, they first have access to the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, provided 10 days of paid sick leave for employees. This does not come out of their own sick time. This is 10 days of paid leave for everyone. And so if they are required to be off work beyond those 10 days, then those would be treated like any other medical leave of absence. And if they have sick time available, they would be charged their own sick time. Otherwise, that they would go unpaid. But all employees do have access to those 10 days of paid time up first and up front. Will long-term subs be available for teachers if they are unable to work? Again, in my previous question, if a teacher is quarantined and they're able to continue working from home, we may not need a long-term sub. However, there are many circumstances where we may need one. We have been in conversation with EduStaff from the get-go. EduStaff is continuing to train their substitutes who intend to be present and available for work. EduStaff has surveyed their current population. About 80% of them plan to continue to work in the fall. We know that substitutes for teachers and parapros is a challenging situation regardless of COVID-19 or not, and it certainly will continue to be so, but we will work with each case one-on-one very specifically, and EduStaff is prepared to provide subs and expects that we will have those subs available. Will a quarantine teacher be required to provide 2 weeks of lesson plans? Again, this prefaces it's possible that they may still be teaching, and so they are doing the lesson planning and teaching. If they are not going to be teaching and they are truly off, as is always the case, the classroom teacher is the best person to determine what the next appropriate steps in the educational plan should be. And so in all instances, when a classroom teacher is going to be gone, they should be working to assist whomever is going to be delivering that instruction in the planning of that instruction. But again, every situation is a little bit different, and they will be working with building staff to make sure that we've got a good education plan moving forward. Are there options available to staff members who do not feel safe reporting back to face-to-face instruction because of pre-existing health conditions? This is really a twofold answer. Staff members that have pre-existing health conditions are strongly encouraged, if you have not already done so, to have conversations with your medical care providers about returning to work. In some instances, your medical care providers may determine that it is not safe and will provide medical documentation to support that. As I mentioned a few minutes ago, in those cases, we will first look to see whether those staff members can be redeployed. And if they're not able to be redeployed, then we will look at addressing those concerns first through emergency paid leave, through Families First, and then handle it as a regular medical leave of absence. If a staff member just in general does not have doctor's notes to support a medical need to be off, they just want to be off, they have the option to request a personal leave of absence. Every one of our bargaining units has the ability to do that, those provisions in their contract. The implications of that, because it's not a medical reason, you would not then have access to emergency paid leave and some of those types of things, but do have the ability to request a leave. What is the protocol for someone testing positive? And will there be contact tracing to those potentially exposed? So we have been, as Matt mentioned earlier, we've had employees working all summer long. We've had students both at summer school and at some of our athletic programs all summer long. So we've been able to kind of establish and refine these protocols over time, and they're working very well. If someone tests positive, immediately they are considered to be 48 hours prior to that test contagious. And so we begin collecting information. Anybody who has been in contact with that person within 48 hours, whether it's a student or a staff member, will be contacted. We work very closely with the health department. And in those instances, those individuals will be contacted not only by the school district, but also by the health department. There are very specific parameters for being outside of school. Somebody with a positive test must be isolated for 10 days, meaning for 10 days they're not coming back on site. But it's 10 days in addition to not having any symptoms and also being without a fever for at least 24 hours without medication. So all of these details, as soon as we get a positive case, again, whether it's a staff or a student, we work with the health department and we communicate both oftentimes by phone with those staff members, but then also follow up in writing, very detailed information regarding when they can return and how long they need to be out. If one student or staff member tests positive in a school, will the school be required to close for a period of time? And again, the answer is it depends. We work very closely with the health department in these situations. It depends on how recent was that staff member in a building. Like I mentioned, 48 hours prior to the time of testing, a person is considered contagious. And so in the event that staff member or student was in the building, we look at how much of the building, where were they at? And again, we'll work with the health department to make a determination regarding, is quarantine the only necessary step? Do we have to shut down a portion of the building or the entire building for a portion of time? All of those things depend on those factors. And again, the health department will be working with us to make those determinations. If one of my students in class gets quarantined, but are not showing symptoms of COVID-19, does the rest of the class have to be quarantined, and do I? The answer to that is no. Per the health department guidelines, somebody who was directly exposed to a person with COVID-19, that individual does have to be quarantined. However, individuals who may have been exposed to someone who is under quarantine do not. We encourage anyone who is in that circumstance to monitor for symptoms, but the rest, those secondary exposures, can continue to participate. Is there a requirement for employees or students who are sick to get tested? Again, there is no testing requirement. However, if a student or employee is experiencing those principal symptoms, they are required to quarantine, but there is no mandatory testing. And my final question, what are the long-term staffing implications? Again, depending on how long long-term really is, we are continuing to evaluate and reevaluate our staffing needs daily sometimes. In all cases, our first go-to is to try to redeploy staff members. As we are continuing to deliver education, we are going to need staff of all sorts of staff to help support that process. And initially, we will look to redeploy staff in order to their own type of work, and if not to their own type of work, to a necessary job that needs to be done maybe somewhere else in the school district. If we end up in a situation where on a long-term basis, meaning for over a semester, we are prohibited from doing face-to-face instruction, we may have to evaluate the amount of staff that we need, as that situation will look different. But as we continue throughout the process, we will continue to update staff along the way.
Thanks, Kim. As a couple final notes, I think you can see that a lot of work has gone into preparing these plans, but it's really, really important to understand the difference as a community between phases 1 through 3 and phase 4, which we currently find ourselves in. Phase 1 through 3 does not allow for any face-to-face instruction. So if we did slip back into phase 3, the district has had to prepare a plan for a 100% virtual experience for our student body, while simultaneously preparing a plan for phase 4, which does allow for face-to-face. We're prepared for both, and I just want to reiterate that point here at the end of today's presentation. And I also want to encourage you, while we answered a lot of questions in this Zoom session, to read the district's reopening plan. There are a number of links that you will find in that document, including some sample student schedules. So from a parent perspective, it might be really worthwhile to take a look at if we are in a virtual setting in phase 1, 2, or 3, what might my child's day actually look like. We have that kind of documentation in there for your review. We're going to update our frequently asked questions document, also post that at the district website. And these documents are robust. The Safe Start plan is 63 pages long. Our district reentry plan is upward to 20 pages long. The district frequently asked questions document has dozens and dozens of questions and answers on them. So this is not the last you'll hear from us. I also want to make that point very clear. Things will change between now and the first day of school. More questions will emerge as a result of today's presentation and your review of these documents that I've just referenced. And we will continue to update our communications as appropriate. But just in closing, hope that you understand our commitment to a traditional face-to-face experience for our students is really where we find ourselves as a district. And that's based on a considerable research and more than just the research, a commitment to ensuring that that environment can be practically made safe for students and staff. And I think as the superintendent, as I've been meeting with other school district leaders, with the heads of the health department, in talking to a number of lawyers that both represent our district and throughout the state in getting reassurance that the route we're going as a district is truly the best for kids. And that's what we believe as educators, that we can do our best work in that face-to-face setting, and that students have a desperate desire to return to that setting. And our job as educators, despite the logistical challenges that we find ourselves in, is to figure out a way to get our kids back in front of our staff. And that's what we've accomplished with this plan. All that being said, there are a number of variables outside of our control, like what the governor's office may decide about a particular instance, or other statewide organizations deciding that we can't function in a face-to-face setting, and therefore Lapeer schools would be forced to go into a virtual one. Understand that if we go back to phase 3, all activities, including athletics and extracurriculars for students, would not be possible. We, as professional educators, sincerely hope that's not the case. We think what's best for our kids is to interact with our staff and one another in an environment where they're most comfortable, and that's what we hope to provide. So again, if there are additional questions, which we know there will be, continue to submit those questions to the district, and updates and very building specific communications will be coming out just like they do every year before school starts. And a lot of these things that are specific to the buildings that your children or child attends are going to be contained in some of those communications. We as a district will continue to work with our staff, including teachers and support staff and building leaders, to make sure that all the protocols we've mentioned are followed and enforced. It's one thing to say these are our plans, it's another to actually execute them. And so there's an entire plan in place to actually make sure that we can actually execute what we've shared with you today. So thank you. Again, we believe that education is an essential industry, and all of our efforts to this point and moving forward are going to reflect that belief. Thanks very much for your time and for committing to review the documents that we're going to share with you, and we look forward to a successful opening of the school year. Thank you very much.